My name is Elena Brooks, and I'm 38 years old. Last Saturday, I walked into a banquet hall filled with people who had spent most of my adult life pretending I didn't exist. I didn't come to prove anything. I just came to say, happy retirement to the man who once taught me how to change a flat tire in the rain. And yet, within 20 minutes, I was being whispered about, judged, and quietly pushed toward the exit like some awkward extra in a play I didn't belong in. They didn't know what I had built. They didn't know who I had become. And they certainly didn't expect the mayor to walk in, spot me from across the room, and say, Elena Brooks, there she is, our city's quiet hero. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this started, to the family that raised me but never really saw me. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own home, the child who chose a different path, the one who wasn't loud enough, rich enough, impressive enough, this story is for you. And if, like me, you've ever been underestimated by the very people who were supposed to believe in you, then I hope you'll stay with me till the end. My mother married my stepfather, Paul Whitaker, when I was 10. He was charming, successful, and effortlessly confident, a man who turned heads at charity galas and shook hands like every deal was worth $1 million. I liked him immediately. He called me kiddo and let me ride up front in his old Mustang. For a little while, he made me feel like I truly belonged, but families, like buildings, are rarely as stable as they seem from the outside. Paul had two sons of his own, Jeremy, the future doctor, and Caleb, the golden boy architect. They weren't unkind, just polished, pre-approved. They talked about internships in Ivy League schools at 13. And while I was painting murals on my bedroom walls and writing poems no one would ever read, they were prepping for the SATs and learning golf. The older we got, the wider the gap became. My mother encouraged it without realizing. Why don't you apply for business school like Jeremy? Caleb just got another scholarship, you know. Elena, maybe art is something you can do on the side. I stopped trying to explain what lit me up inside. Stopped trying to impress people who only clapped when the world did. They called me the dreamer. I learned to wear the label quietly, like a scar that doesn't quite heal, but teaches you something about who you are. If you've ever been the overlooked one, the quiet fighter, or the person they thought wouldn't amount to much, you're not alone. Subscribe to this channel if you believe success has more than one definition. And if this story touches something in you, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear yours, because sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truth. Growing up, I learned to measure love by volume, how loudly they clapped when someone else succeeded, how softly they spoke when I walked into the room. At every holiday dinner, the spotlight naturally drifted to Jeremy's medical research or Caleb's urban designs. My updates, volunteering at shelters, working on a documentary about homelessness, finishing a community art installation, were met with polite nods or, worse, that tight-lipped smile my mother wore when she didn't know what to say. One year, I gave my mom a hand-painted portrait of our old house. It took me 2 weeks. She hung it in the laundry room. That same year, Caleb gifted her a coffee table book from Milan. It still sits in the center of the living room. I wish I could say I didn't care. But I did. I just stopped showing it. After high school, I enrolled in a liberal arts college in upstate New York. Not Ivy League, not flashy. But it felt like home. A space where people cared more about ideas than appearances. I majored in community arts and social impact, a degree that made Jeremy chuckle and made my mother look uncomfortable every time someone asked, "So, what is Elena studying?" I never blamed Paul for the distance that grew between us. Not really. He never raised his voice. He never said I disappointed him. But that was almost worse. The silence, the lack of curiosity, the way he looked past me when my brothers walked in the room. At some point, Kiddo became Elena, and I wasn't sure he noticed the change. After graduation, I moved back to Portland with no job and no blueprint, just a heart that burned to do something that mattered. I picked up freelance gigs, designed murals for local youth centers, and spent evenings volunteering at shelters. I made barely enough to scrape by, but I slept well. For the first time, I felt aligned with my purpose. My family, however, saw it as a phase, a cute, misguided little detour before real life started. At my stepbrother Caleb's wedding, hosted in a vineyard, complete with drones and live harpists. I showed up in a thrifted navy dress and hand-wrapped a gift I made myself, a custom painting of the place where he proposed. His wife's family mistook me for a vendor. I wasn't even offended. I was used to it by then. I smiled, congratulated them, and watched as the people who shared my blood floated past me like ghosts in tailored suits. The truth? They didn't hate me. They just didn't see me. Not really. Not unless I fit into their version of what success looked like. I let it go. Or at least I thought I had. I stopped showing up to brunches where my name was an afterthought. I stopped trying to explain what I did for a living. They thought I was working part-time at a nonprofit's front desk. They didn't know that I had founded the organization. They didn't know that Hands Forward had grown from a single Portland shelter into a multi-state initiative, empowering thousands of formerly homeless individuals to find jobs, receive training, and rebuild their lives. And honestly, I preferred it that way. Not because I was ashamed, but because I needed to know. Would they still see me as worthy if they believed I had nothing? That question would be tested in the most public, painful way imaginable, at Paul's grand retirement gala, where I was invited not out of love, but out of formality, where I was meant to sit quietly in the shadows, while they celebrated a version of success I no longer subscribed to. But the universe, as it turns out, had other plans. The invitation arrived in a thick cream-colored envelope, embossed with gold lettering that smelled faintly of expensive cologne, and "You are cordially invited to a celebration honoring Paul Whitaker's retirement after 35 years of public." Below that, in smaller print, was the location: the Grantham Hall, downtown Portland's most prestigious venue. The kind of place with valet parking, $300 a plate dinners, and chandeliers that sparkled like they knew you couldn't afford to look at them. My name wasn't handwritten. It wasn't even Elena Brooks. It was printed as Elena B., plus guest optional, right between my brother's families and a line item for city council members and community donors. It stung more than I wanted to admit. I turned the envelope over in my hands, debating whether to even go. Paul hadn't spoken to me one-on-one in over a year. The last time we saw each other, Christmas, he had given me a stiff handshake and said, "Still doing that community work, right?" before turning to ask Jeremy about a new biotech grant. I stood there in my mother's living room, holding a tray of peppermint bark no one touched, watching as they circled him like satellites around the sun. But still, despite everything, some small part of me remembered. The way he used to make pancakes in the shape of my initials. The time he helped me build a science fair volcano and cheered the loudest, even when it fizzled. How he once told me, being kind in a room full of ambition is a quiet kind of power. That man had faded somewhere along the way, swallowed by board meetings, campaign donors, and the invisible pressure to keep up with the people on his Christmas card list. But I missed him, even if I didn't quite trust him anymore. A week before the event, I called Maria, my friend and co-director at Hands Forward. "You think I'm stupid for going, don't you?" I asked, pacing my living room. "I think you're brave," she replied gently. "But also, maybe take a flask?" I laughed. It helped, but the anxiety didn't leave. I spent the next few days dodging texts from my mother. They weren't so much invitations as thinly veiled warnings. "Make sure you're dressed appropriately. There will be city people there. Try to avoid any political talk at the table. Oh, and please don't mention the shelter work. Not everyone finds those stories appropriate over dinner." That last one hit me like a slap. The irony, of course, was that Paul had spent his entire career as Deputy Director of Housing Initiatives, the very system my organization now worked alongside. He had shaken hands in front of cameras while we scrubbed graffiti off back walls and set up mobile job clinics under highway overpasses. But while his work made headlines, mine made footnotes. And maybe that's exactly how they wanted to keep it. The night before the event, I stood in front of my closet for almost an hour. Should I go glamorous, prove a point, show up in designer heels and silence them with fabric and sparkle? But that wasn't me, never had been. I chose a navy blue jumpsuit, clean cut, well-fitted, understated. My mother would call it plain, but I knew better. It was strength without screaming, elegance without apology. Paired with a silver bracelet from a local artist and a soft braid that reminded me of simpler versions of myself, I felt like me. Not the version they tolerated, the version I had fought to become. As I stepped into my car, a familiar ache crept into my chest. Not sadness exactly, but the weight of years of being misunderstood. They still see me as the one who could have done more, I thought. The one who didn't quite fit the mold they tried to press me into. But that night, I wasn't walking in to prove them wrong. I was walking in to stand my ground, to honor the part of me that kept showing up, no matter how many times she was asked to leave the room. And what happened next? Well, no one, not even me, could have seen that coming. The parking valet barely glanced at my car, a 10-year-old Subaru Forester with a cracked rearview mirror and a bumper sticker that read, "People over profit." I caught the flicker of confusion in his eyes, the way he looked at the guest list on his clipboard, then back at me, like I didn't quite fit the profile. Get used to that, I told myself. Inside, Grantham Hall was a world built to impress. Marble floors, tall crystal vases bursting with orchids, and a string quartet playing something slow and expensive. It smelled like wealth and polished wood and polite expectations. I checked my coat, held my breath, and stepped into the reception. There they were, my mother in a deep emerald gown, already mid-laugh with two women who ran the Historical Society. Caleb, in a tailored charcoal suit, sipping champagne and nodding like he agreed with himself. Jeremy, standing near the mayor, deep in conversation, no doubt explaining a new surgical breakthrough or something equally headline-worthy. No one saw me walk in. Not really. I stood still for a moment, letting the room adjust around me. I could feel it, that subtle shift. Not the kind born of curiosity, but of judgment. Heads tilted, eyes lingered, lips pursed ever so slightly. Then I heard it, the unmistakable voice of my mother. "Elena!" she called, as if surprised I'd come. She walked toward me with arms partially outstretched, stopping just short of an actual hug. "I wasn't sure you'd make it," she said, adjusting a strand of her hair instead of touching me. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, keeping my tone even. Her eyes moved from my shoes to my jumpsuit to the delicate bracelet on my wrist. "You look nice," she said, with the same tone one might use to compliment a child's drawing of a dog that looks more like a potato. "Thanks," I said. "So do you." From behind her, Jeremy emerged. "Hey, Lena." Only my family still called me that, like a name I'd outgrown but was too polite to correct. "You still doing that, non-profit stuff?" he asked, already glancing past me. "Still building it, yes," I answered. "Sit. We just launched our 5th city location." "Oh." He nodded slowly, then smiled like I'd said something adorably ambitious but slightly naive. "Well, good for you. Keeps you busy, I guess." I opened my mouth to reply, but Caleb cut in. "You know, some of Dad's colleagues are here tonight. Big names. Maybe steer clear of the politics and charity talk," he said, chuckling like it was a joke. But it wasn't. "And don't worry," he added. "We pitched in to cover your share of the group gift, a golf retreat in Scotland. You can Venmo us later. Or not. It's fine." I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't bite. Not yet. Instead, I smiled. The kind of smile you wear when your pride and your patience are hanging by the same thread. "Thank you," I said simply. Just then, the event coordinator called for guests to begin taking their seats in the grand ballroom. My mother placed a hand lightly on my arm. "Elena, sweetie, actually, would you mind sitting toward the back? We had to arrange tables based on Paul's work circles and city council hierarchy. There's still a spot at table 9, near the buffet, nice and close. The spot where the interns sit, or the vendors, or the people no one's quite sure how to place." I looked into her eyes, searching for any trace of recognition, of warmth. Nothing. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just not important in their world. I was a liability. Something to be politely managed, packaged, and placed out of sight. I nodded slowly. "Sure, Mom, table 9 it is." But as I turned away, I caught sight of someone near the entrance, a familiar face, dressed in gray, scanning the room. It was Mayor Diane Caldwell, and the moment her eyes landed on me, they lit up. "Elena Brooks," she called across the room. "I was hoping I'd see you here." And just like that, everything began to shift. Heads turned, conversations faded mid-sentence. Even the string quartet faltered as the mayor's voice cut clean through the air. "Elena Brooks, I was hoping I'd see you here." My mother's hand dropped from my arm. Jeremy blinked like someone had misheard. Caleb turned his head slowly, confused. And there she was, Mayor Diane Caldwell, striding across the room in a slate gray suit, every inch the commanding presence she was known for. The mayor of Portland, three-term incumbent, guest of honor, walking toward me. "Elena," she said, reaching out to grasp both of my hands with warmth that couldn't be faked. "We are still talking about the job summit you led last quarter. The city council is hoping to build a permanent partnership with Hands Forward." A few nearby guests tilted in closer. That name, Hands Forward, meant something to them. Behind me, I felt my mother stiffen. "Oh," I said, managing a smile. "I didn't realize you'd be attending." Diane laughed. "Paul's retirement? Please. I had to be here. Besides, I was hoping I'd get a moment to thank you again. Your team's mobile hiring unit changed the game for our East End shelters. We've never had employment placement numbers like that before." Her praise was casual but public, and unmistakably sincere. More eyes turned toward me now, calculating, curious. I could practically hear the questions forming in my family's minds. Wait, mobile hiring unit? East End shelters? City council partnership? My brother said nothing, but I could see it in their eyes. A mixture of confusion, disbelief, and, beneath that, something they'd never directed at me before. Respect. Or at least the beginning of it. Diane gave my arm a friendly squeeze. "Listen," she said, lowering her voice. "I'd love to have you speak at the Innovation and Housing Summit next month. Can we schedule lunch to talk details?" "Of course," I said. Behind her, a man in a headset approached, clearly part of the event staff. "Mayor Caldwell, they're ready for your remarks," he said. She nodded and turned back to me one last time. "So glad you're here tonight. You belong in rooms like this, Elena. More than most." And then she walked away, leaving a silence behind that was louder than any insult I'd ever swallowed. My mother was the first to speak. "Elena, how do you know the mayor?" Her voice trembled, but she tried to keep it measured. I turned toward her slowly. "We've worked together for 3 years. Hands Forward has been part of several city initiatives." "Hands Forward," Jeremy repeated. "You mean you work there?" "I started it," I said simply. 7 years ago. We just opened our 6th city chapter." Caleb's face flushed. "Wait, you're the Elena Brooks from the State Journal piece last year? The one who won the Wilcox Humanitarian Award?" I nodded. "But why didn't you ever tell us?" my mother asked, almost whispering now. "Why keep it a secret?" "Would it have mattered?" I asked gently. "When you thought I was just doing charity stuff, no one asked. No one wanted to know more." None of them answered. Instead, they watched as the event coordinator approached me. "Ms. Brooks," he said with a respectful nod, "we've moved your seat. Table 1, just beside the stage. It's reserved for the mayor's guests." My mother's mouth parted, ready to protest, then closed again. Jeremy stepped aside. Caleb looked at the ground. I gave a soft smile. Table 9 was starting to feel a little drafty anyway. As I walked toward the front of the room, my footsteps felt weightless. Not because I had won, but because for the first time I didn't have to shrink to fit the shape they had carved for me. They couldn't unsee it now, couldn't unknow me, and I wasn't going to apologize for finally being seen. By the time I reached table 1, the entire atmosphere of the room had shifted. Not just around me, but within my family. Minutes ago, I was a footnote. Now, I was a headline. And just like that, they began rewriting their stories. Jeremy appeared at my side first. "Elena," he said, laughing a little too loudly. "You sly devil. I had no idea you were doing all this big picture work. You should have said something sooner. I turned to him slowly. You never asked. He blinked, clearly thrown off. Well, yeah, I guess I didn't realize it was that serious, but wow, very cool stuff. Really admirable. Before I could answer, Caleb slid in next. You know, he said, leaning in like a co-conspirator, I've been wanting to get more involved in community-driven design. Maybe we could, I don't know, collaborate? Pro bono work, maybe? Just to give back. I raised an eyebrow. You mocked my job for years. Now you want in? No, no, he said quickly. Not like that. I've always admired your commitment. It's just, I didn't understand the scale. That's on me. And then came the final act. My mother. She appeared like a stage cue, perfectly timed, perfectly poised. Elena, she said, taking my hands with a tremble in her voice. Why didn't you tell us? We've been so worried all these years, and here you are running this enterprise. It's incredible. You mean the nonprofit stuff I was told not to bring up at dinner? I asked, gently pulling my hands back. She flushed. I didn't mean it like that. I just didn't want you to feel out of place. I met her gaze. I never needed help feeling out of place. You made sure of that. Behind her, I saw Paul, my stepfather, the man of the evening, watching us from a distance, unsure whether to approach. His retirement party was in full swing, but his eyes were fixed on me. Elena, my mother said again, lowering her voice. You're being unkind. No, I said, my voice calm. I'm being honest. There's a difference. The truth was, none of them were celebrating me. They were just trying to reposition themselves near my spotlight. Now that they knew I had one, it wasn't admiration, it was damage control. When the event coordinator announced dinner was served, I walked to my new seat. Table 1 was already buzzing with conversation. A local journalist asked for an interview. A city council member handed me her card. I took it all in politely, graciously. But something inside me had hardened. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. I wouldn't let their sudden interest rewrite the years they had erased me. And I wouldn't let their guilt become my responsibility to soothe. Midway through dinner, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Paul. Can we talk? He asked quietly. I nodded, setting down my fork. We stepped out onto the small terrace adjoining the ballroom. The city sparkled below, the hum of the party fading behind us. I'm sorry, he said, before I could say anything. Not just for tonight, for all of it. I didn't say a word. I wanted him to sit in that silence, not out of cruelty, but because I had earned it. I've been proud of you this whole time, he added. I just didn't know how to show it. Or maybe, I said, you only looked for things that matched your definition of pride. He flinched, but didn't deny it. I saw the mayor talking to you, he said after a moment. And it hit me. I don't know what you've been doing. Not really. And I'm your parent. That's on me. I let out a slow breath. There's still time, but only if you want to know me, not just the version that makes headlines. He nodded. Then let's start again. And somehow, for the first time in years, I believed him. When I stepped back into the ballroom after talking with Paul, dessert had just been served. I spotted my mother near the dessert table, delicately spooning crème brûlée onto her plate, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened that night. Her back was straight, her expression unreadable. But I could tell, by the tightness of her shoulders, the way she clutched her spoon, that something in her had cracked. She saw me approaching and quickly put on her practiced smile. Everything okay with Paul? Yes, I said simply. We talked. She hesitated, then in a quieter voice asked, Would you walk with me for a moment? I nodded. We slipped out through the side doors into a quiet hallway, lined with framed photos of the city's past leaders. The lighting was soft, and for the first time that night, it felt like we had stepped out of the performance. My mother clasped her hands in front of her, her fingers twisting the edge of her bracelet. I owe you an apology, she began. her voice softer than I'd heard in years. Not just for tonight, for a lot of things. I didn't say anything, not because I didn't want to hear it, but because I wanted her to mean it. When you were little, she continued, you were so different from the boys, so sensitive, so creative. I didn't know what to do with that. I raised an eyebrow. So you ignored it? She flinched. I tried to mold you into something safer, more acceptable. I didn't want you to struggle like I did. You mean like wearing hand-me-downs and living in a duplex, I said. Things you've been running from since I was born. She exhaled, slow and shaky. Yes, I grew up ashamed of everything. Where we lived, what we wore, who we were. When I met Paul, I thought, if I could just create the perfect family, the perfect image, I could erase that shame. But I wasn't part of that image, I said quietly. Was I? Her eyes filled with tears. You were the part I didn't know how to control, she whispered. You didn't chase status. You didn't care what people thought. And that scared me. Because I did. I still do. There it was. The truth I'd waited decades to hear. Not a performance, not a defense, just raw honesty. I took a breath. You know, all these years, I thought there was something wrong with me for not fitting in. But now I see. I didn't fail to meet your expectations. Your expectations failed to see me. My mother wiped at her cheek with a napkin she'd crumpled in her hand. You're right. And I'm sorry for all the years I made you feel small. You deserved better. I stared at her, unsure if I was ready to let the wall down completely. But a part of me, the part that still remembered her brushing my hair before school, the bedtime stories, the way she used to call me my star, wanted to try. I'm not asking you to undo the past, I said, but if we're going to have a future, it has to be real. I need you to see me as I am, not as you wish I'd been. She nodded slowly. Then that's where we'll begin. That night, for the first time, my mother walked beside me. Not behind, not ahead, not correcting my posture or smoothing my hair. Just beside me. And that was a start. I had just returned to the ballroom when Jeremy intercepted me near the espresso cart, holding 2 tiny porcelain cups like a peace offering. One for you, he said, extending one. No strings attached. I took it, cautiously. Thanks. He hesitated, then gestured toward a quieter corner near the wall of windows. Mind if we talk? I nodded. We sat facing the glass, the city glittering behind him like a backdrop to a life that, for so long, I had believed belonged only to them, the successful ones, the ones who had it all figured out. Jeremy ran a hand through his perfect hair, the same gesture he'd used since high school whenever he was unsure of what to say. I'll be honest, he started. When you walked in tonight, I didn't get it. I thought, why is she here? What's she trying to prove? I raised an eyebrow. And now? He exhaled. Now I'm wondering how I never saw any of it. You. I mean, I literally thought you were a receptionist at a nonprofit. I took a sip of espresso. That's what you wanted to believe. He paused, caught. Maybe. There was a silence, not hostile, just full. I guess I've always needed to know where everyone fits, he continued. It's how I make sense of the world. Titles, credentials, earnings. It's all measurable. Tao. But people aren't spreadsheets, I said, and value isn't always printed on a resume. Jeremy looked down at his cup, then said quietly, Do you ever feel free? I blinked. What? Free, like you're not chasing something just to feel worthy. That caught me off guard. I looked at him carefully. Behind the designer suit, the medical accolades, the sharp wit, was someone I hadn't seen in a long time, someone who used to build Lego cities with me on the carpet and once cried when his science project broke. Some days I do, I admitted. Not all. But I'm not running from myself anymore. That's its own kind of freedom. He nodded slowly. I envy that. Just then, Caleb approached, hands in his pockets, looking hesitant for once. Can I join? I glanced at Jeremy. He shrugged. Might as well make it a family reunion. Caleb sat down, cleared his throat, and looked straight at me. Okay, I was a jerk earlier. I tilted my head. You were. I didn't mean to be cruel, he said. But I was. I've spent years pretending I was better because my paycheck had more digits or my apartment had a rooftop view. But deep down, he faltered. You knew? I offered. He nodded. I knew I wasn't happier. I knew I couldn't look myself in the mirror without wondering if any of it meant something. You do work that matters, and I didn't know how to process that. So I made it small. I let that sit for a moment. I never needed you to be impressed, I said. I just needed you to treat me like I belonged. Caleb sighed. I'm sorry, Elena. Truly. I looked between them, two men who had once towered over me in pride and presence, now sitting with open hands, asking not for approval, but understanding. Here's the thing, I said. You don't have to become like me. You just have to stop measuring worth like a bank statement. Jeremy smiled. That's going to take some unlearning. I'll help, I said. If you're willing, Caleb chuckled. You might regret that offer. I shook my head. No, I think this, right here, is where real family begins. The party had started to wind down. Guests were filtering out with gift bags and leftover slices of cake. Someone had dimmed the lights just slightly, and the string quartet had packed up and gone home. But I lingered, not out of politeness, but necessity. Because in the quiet after the applause, I could finally hear myself. I walked out onto the terrace alone. The city shimmered beneath a dark sky, each window a flicker of someone else's story. From here, the world looked vast and unknowable. And for the first time all night, I allowed myself to ask the question I'd been avoiding. Why did I really keep it all a secret? Sure, I had said it was about testing them, about finding out whether they could love me for who I was instead of what I had. And that was true, partly. But beneath that noble explanation was something smaller, something harder to admit. I hadn't just been testing them, I'd been protecting myself. Because what if I had told them and they still didn't care? What if I had shared the wins, the milestones, the impact, and they still looked at me like I was a footnote in their big glossy narrative? Keeping the truth to myself gave me control. They couldn't reject what they didn't know. But that control came at a cost, the cost of connection. And maybe that's what tonight had forced me to see. I wasn't just hurt by their rejection. I was scared that their acceptance might only come once I became impressive enough. Which meant, deep down, I didn't fully believe I was enough either. The realization was sharp, but not cruel. It didn't accuse. It revealed. And in that moment, I stopped seeing myself as the misunderstood daughter, or the underestimated sister, or even the secret CEO. I saw myself as a woman who had worked hard, yes, but also hidden, because being invisible had once felt safer than being seen and dismissed. Behind me, the terrace door creaked open. It was Paul, carrying two small glasses. Mind if I join? I nodded, and he handed me one. We stood there in silence for a while. No speeches, no spotlights, just two people who had missed each other for far too long. He raised his glass. To second chances. I clinked mine against his, then added, to finally telling the truth, especially to ourselves. He smiled, then looked out over the skyline. You know, I always thought success meant legacy. Buildings, awards, press, but maybe it's moments like this. Quiet ones? I asked. Yeah, he said. The kind that can't be posted or published. The kind that change you instead of impressing anyone else. That night, when I got home, I placed the gold-trimmed invitation back in its envelope and tucked it into a drawer. Not as a keepsake, but as a reminder. Sometimes, the hardest person to be honest with is yourself. But healing starts when you stop pretending. Even, especially when no one's clapping. 6 weeks after that night, my entire family, including Paul, my mother, Jeremy, and Caleb, stood in the lobby of Hands Forward, looking around like they'd stepped into a foreign country. They shook hands with my staff. They watched quietly as a young woman named Maribel shared how our job training helped her go from living in her car to managing a community kitchen. They toured the digital classroom where former inmates now studied to become counselors and mentors themselves. No press, no fanfare, just truth. At one point, I caught Paul wiping his eyes while listening to one of our youth coordinators explain our newest partnership with the city. "This place," he whispered, "it's what I always hoped government could do. And somehow, you've made it happen without the red tape." I smiled. "We built it because no one else would." He nodded. "And because you would." Even my mother, high heels clicking uncomfortably on the old tile floor, stopped in front of the wall of portraits we kept of every graduate of our re-entry program. She stared for a long time at the photos, many of them tattered, full of faces the world had once overlooked. Then she turned to me and said softly, "I didn't understand. I still don't fully, but I want to try." For her, that was monumental. Later that night, over tea at my apartment, mismatched mugs, chipped counter, soft jazz playing in the background, Jeremy asked a question that lingered long after it left his lips. "So what's next, Elena? Now that they all know who you are?" I thought about it. For a long time, I had worked to protect something fragile inside me, something that didn't want to be defined by anyone else's standards. But now I wanted more. Not more attention, not more recognition, more honesty, more integrity, more relationships that don't rely on resumes to have value. "I think I'm done hiding," I said. "Not because I want to be seen, but because I want to live fully. And you can't do that from the shadows." He nodded. "That's brave." "No," I replied. "It's overdue." You know, people often think revenge means proving someone wrong, showing up in designer clothes, dropping big titles, making others feel small for once. But what I've learned is the real power comes from not needing to prove anything at all, from knowing who you are, even if no one claps, from choosing peace over performance, from showing up not to impress, but to connect. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt unseen, unheard, like your value depended on your salary or your degrees or how well you fit into the family mold, please hear this. Your worth is not up for debate. Your story matters, even when others don't understand it. And the quiet, meaningful work you're doing in the world, it changes everything. Have you ever had to walk your path without applause? Just the truth of who you are? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this journey meant something to you, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps more stories like this reach the people who need to hear them. Until next time, stay true, stay kind, and never forget, sometimes the quietest ones carry the strongest fire.